Good evening. Welcome to another round of Pup Theology. I'm Pastor Gavin. We have a great program for you tonight. Like the last few months, we've been online. You can go to our Facebook page, Pup Theology San Antonio on Facebook to check out all of our previous Pup Theologies. We've been trying to keep it safe here for everyone, but we remind everybody that we still love the Friendly Spot Ice House and support them all you can during this time. They are back open, and hopefully we will be back there soon. Also online there as well. So thank you for another round of Pup Theology. Right now, I'm with my good friend Bekah. She'll be here soon. But we're drinking San Antonio Lager today. It's another San Antonio-like special here, like we always do. And we have some great people to interview, especially the CEO from Pre-K for SA. So welcome. And we ask you to share this video if you're watching right now. We want you to share this video. If you have any questions for Bekah or our guest, you can post that in the Facebook page feed or on our YouTube channel as well, that we see those questions and we can interact with you as best as we can. So please post your comments. So welcome to another round of a Wednesday night Pup Theology. And I'm going to introduce my co-host for most of our Pup Theologies is Bekah McNeel. She's with 74 Million, an educational website, also an editor at Christianity Today, and a former reporter for the San Antonio Report. You know her very well. So Bekah, here you go. We're going to social distance this exchange.
Hello, everybody. Yes, again, another San Antonio Lager and another Southtown plug for us. We have, you'll see behind me, this lovely plant from David's Plantas, a hobby turned, I think it's a hobby that took over his life from the principal of Bonham Academy. He does these amazing potted plants. I brought one with us to make our pseudo-friendly spot a little friendlier. And now I'm going to bring on Sarah Baray. Sarah is a familiar face to those of us in education in San Antonio, those of us who report on education, and for many actual educators, practitioners. She is an authority on early childhood education. She has taken over what was started. She's not the founding director of Pre-K for SA, but she has definitely taken it over and seen it into its new phase. And pretty soon she will be at the helm this November when Pre-K for SA goes back before voters for reauthorization. So we are definitely going to talk about that. So I'm going to bring her on now and let her say a little bit more about herself. Hi, Sarah.
Hey, glad to be here. I'm excited. I live in Southtown, so like this is my home.
So I could, like, if we took off our headphones, we could probably just yell this interview.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Well, thank you so much. And usually when we do Pub Theology at the Friendly Spot, we pick a question. The guest host picks a question and everybody there goes around and answers it, and that's how we introduce ourselves. So I'm going to kick off the interview by letting you ask the first question, and I will answer it. And then if anybody else would like to answer it, I want to call attention to our Facebook feed. You may ask questions throughout the night, or answer questions in this case, throughout the night in our Facebook feed, and we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear what you want to ask Dr. Baray, and we are going to try to pull those questions up as quickly and get those into the interview, because I have a pretty standard list of questions, but I know that our friends out on social media are going to come up with some things that I can't think of. So it's always nice to have the community pitching in. All right, Sarah, what is it? What do you want to know?
So I want to know, what is your earliest school memory?
Well, I did not go to pre-kinder. The 80s, my parents put me directly into kindergarten. And I think my earliest memory is roasting pumpkin seeds. It was fall, and we did the whole process of like cutting the pumpkin open. We all got to scrape stuff out. We cleaned off the seeds. Everybody had their little pod, and then we roasted them. And I was so excited about it as a kid. I had these like I think I thought it was going to taste like pumpkin pie, and it was disgusting. And,
but nonetheless, a pleasant memory. It sounds like, other than the disgusting part, right?
yes, super pleasant. And I do just remember how hands-on it felt. I remember the gooiness of the pumpkin and thinking and having this very clear understanding afterwards of how seeds grow into pumpkins, and it's a job well done.
Ah, that's great. I'm glad you had a good experience. Some people have, like, I always talk about my experience. I also didn't go to pre-K. I started in kindergarten, and one of my most vivid memories of kindergarten is, you know this, Bekah, because you've met me in person. I'm 6 feet tall, and even in kindergarten, I was 5 feet tall by second grade. So even in kindergarten, I was well over 4 feet tall. So I remember laying on the nap mat, which was really just a towel that all our parents had to send, and my legs stuck off the end of the towel. So it was not a restful nap time for me. But nonetheless, I loved kindergarten, other than that one traumatic experience of having to lay with a towel that was too short. So
the towel, yes. There's a very set group of measurements.
Yes.
Crowd, like their chair. Yeah. And I just thought, man, like being an adult and having to run into the pre-K bathroom.
Yeah, it's serious. It's quite a trick.
Like, oh, I'm not sure my knees do this. Well, so thank you for being here. And I know that there are 3 different streams of discussion that we could have, really, as far as things that are different about this September/October than usual. We have COVID.
Mm-hmm.
We have you guys being up for reauthorization. And then we just have, and then the state expansion of pre-K and how you guys are becoming a partner in that, and trying to fulfill that mission of more high quality seats for more kids in Bexar County and San Antonio. So you pick, where do you want to start?
Well, COVID is on everybody's mind, and I think that's the place to start, because everything is about, well, we were doing this and then COVID, and so that's it's changed a lot about what's happening, and it's also brought some new opportunities. So I was just having a conversation earlier today that one of the things that's changed is a lot of families are not sure what to do with their little ones and whether to send them back to school. So we're working with school districts and other providers to get the word out that it's very important for families to enroll their children in pre-K. If they have a 4-year-old, there are spots available. And we know that not every family is ready to send their children back to school. Some are, and we certainly, our centers are open, and that's going really well. But all of our programs across the city have remote options for families that want that too. But it's important that people understand that pandemic or no pandemic, children's brains are still developing very rapidly. And that 4-year-old year is a unique opportunity to develop a strong brain architecture. And we don't want to lose that. And so we're trying really hard to help families make the best decisions that they can, and to know that it's time. Let's get our kids back in school.
So I've heard, I've been watching this nationally and reporting on it, that a lot of families are just saying, you know what, remote learning is really hard with the kids. I'm doing a 4-year-old who's doing remote, and I have a lot of things to say about it. It's amazing, it's great. My son gets in the car, buckles up the other day. We were driving off to get something. Just hate Zoom.
I think many of us have that feeling now and again. It's nothing against Zoom, but my goodness, yeah, it's a different.
But there's a lot of people just saying, you know what, either I'll come when the pandemic passes, and there's differing things. There's some people who absolutely hate the remote option, and there's people who are too scared of the very real threat of COVID in person. And so have y'all seen the dip in numbers that we're seeing nationally?
We have, and across San Antonio, there's a dip of about 30%, which is similar to what's happening across the nation. And we've seen that ours is off about 25%, but We're starting to see families come back now that we're open in person. They see the safety measures we have in place. We've been open for a few weeks. Things are kind of returning to as normal as they're going to be, at least until we have a vaccine. And that means for us, we're only going to be at 50% capacity. So whereas we normally have 2,000 children in our centers, this year we'll have 1,000. We're serving the others through remote. But as you said, remote learning with little ones is hard. You have to have an adult. It's not like a middle schooler where they can get on an app and do for a while on their own. Young children actually need guidance, and the learning that comes with early learning is from adult-child interactions and interacting with peers. So it's through those interactions, whether they're in the home or whether they're in school, that children grow and develop, and that's hard. And for us at Pre-K for SA, our families are all still working. They've been working. They're the essential workers who have been working all the way through the pandemic. We've had a number that have lost their jobs, but when they're going back to jobs, it's still in these essential roles in, grocery stores and medical centers, in places that have been open. So they need a place to send their child safely to school. And so we're happy to provide that. But we also know that for some families, they're concerned because they don't have health care. And so if their child comes up with COVID and they bring it home, now it may be passed on to somebody in the family who then, that means they're out of work and folks are just living paycheck to paycheck. And so there's a lot of concerns among families, and legitimately so. So we are trying to talk through those with individual families to say, let's talk about your situation. Here's what your options are. Let's help you, support you in making whatever decision makes sense for you and your family.
Yeah. So, are y'all able to, when a family says, okay, I just can't, we're like kids staying with grandma, she's not going to be able to monitor the Zoom. What are their options? What can they do?
Yeah. Well, so what we're doing, working with them to say, can we teach you? Can we have someone come teach grandma how to make sure the 4-year-old can get on the iPad? Because really, the 4-year-olds know how to do it. And one of the things we're helping families to see is that what we really want is someone to be there to have a conversation with the child. They don't have to be a teacher, but they can help the child say, okay, it's time to get on Zoom. And once the children are used to it, they can do it. And then we send home like books or activities. Could you read with your child? Could you let your child go outside and play? And here's some activities you could do with them. But most importantly, we're trying to help families feel okay with whatever their situation is and not put any more stress or burden or guilt on them, right? If you can't spend all day with your child, or you don't have somebody that's going to sit side by side all the time, that's okay. Let's figure out what we can do to support you in the circumstance that you have. Because some instruction is better than no instruction, right? And remote instruction is better than nothing. I mean, the best is obviously to be in a classroom with a highly skilled teacher, but these are unusual times. And so the last thing we want to do is make families feel more stressed out than they already are about all the many different things that they have to deal with. And so we want to be a supporter of them and help them figure out what makes sense for them.
So are you seeing more families who would come to center if y'all could handle the capacity, or are y'all able to accommodate everybody who wants to be there? There just is not a lot of people who want to be there.
Well, so far we're able to handle the capacity, but we're just next week bringing back our third wave of families. And then once our third wave of families, because we've been phasing them in just to make sure that we had things in place and that it was safe, we'll have about 1 or 2 spots in every classroom on average that we could fill with somebody else. And so we're going to have a conversation with our families who had selected remote learning to say, do you think differently now? Do you want to come back and come in person, or are you comfortable staying in remote? And if we do have spots left after that, then we'll go out and allow other folks to come in. So we're really trying to do it in an intentional way so that families can feel comfortable with the decisions that they're making for their children.
Yeah, absolutely. So far in bringing, because one of the funny things I keep hearing is, what, you can't do pre-K, social distance, they're never going to keep their masks on, they're going to want to hug each other. What are the challenges? What's the hardest part of COVID protocols with 4-year-olds?
Yeah, sure. Well, I sit on a statewide advisory group that was helping think about reopening around childcare and how do we do that. And one of the things that we agreed upon right away and shared with policymakers and the healthcare providers is there is no such thing as social distancing with young children. It isn't real, and it isn't going to happen. And even if we could make children sit in one spot all day, we really wouldn't want to do that. So what we have to think about is how do you create a classroom that is as safe as possible, knowing that children aren't going to stay completely apart all the time. They're not going to stay 6 feet apart. I know people worried about children wearing masks, and there were all these funny memes about it. I've never had one concern about the children. It's always the adults, right? It's harder for us to adjust than it is the children. Now, occasionally we'll have a child who doesn't, who wants to twist the mask around or the face shield or what have you. But really, children, once you teach them the purpose and they understand that's part of what allows us to be in the classroom together, they're like, okay, I'll wear it. And they do. And so we actually do a lot more of reminding ourselves as adults than we do of children. And so the kids are great there, and children love to wash their hands, and they're excited they get to use hand sanitizer this year. We've never allowed that before, but so that's new. When they come in the door, they are sanitizing their hands. They love to remind each other. So the kids have adjusted, and they're just, kids are kids. They're happy to be in school, and they don't know, they've never been in school before, so they don't know that it's not normal to wear a mask and a face shield in the classroom. That's just what their world is right now.
There may be a generation of kids who are like, I just feel more comfortable if I could wear it.
They might. And who knows? I'm hopeful that this helps with flu season, right? So, right. So if kids have on masks and shields, and so do the adults, maybe we won't see the kind of flu outbreaks that we've seen in the past, and we could learn something from that. I certainly have learned more about HVAC systems and MERV filters than I ever knew I needed to know. And so I think there's some things from this that we'll stick with and that will help us in the future, even once we have a vaccine for this particular virus.
Because you guys rehabbed existing buildings. So did y'all go through and do a whole nother round? Like, okay, now we need to do this upgrade, that upgrade.
We did. So we went through and we said, what are the things that we can do that make sense, that will benefit us in the long run, that we might stick with long term and that are cost effective, versus things that are just cost prohibitive and we wouldn't necessarily need after the pandemic. So we did things like upgrade our HVAC system, because that's going to be great even in the future for flu. We added in a temperature thermal scanner so that when adults walk in the building, they get their automatic temperature taken, which again for us is long term, because you're not supposed to be in a school or childcare facility if you have a fever anyway, like in normal times. So, and then we've, added things like plexiglass that eventually will take off, I hope, off the tables and that sort of thing. But, and then added some additional outdoor spaces for children and staff, which is a good thing, because part of our program is getting children and staff outdoors anyway. So it's just given us a reason to say more spaces for people to get out in beautiful San Antonio weather. Like, it's not always this beautiful, but today was amazing. And so it was a great day to be outside.
The time. Now is definitely the time to take advantage of that. We've got
it's gorgeous.
Again before Thanksgiving, but for today.
That's right. That's right.
Well, tell people, those who don't know, you mentioned the outdoor. I'd love for you to just kind of give us a brief on what Pre-K for SA does. I think a lot of times when people imagine city-run daycare, what they're imagining, and not pre-K kind of standard bearer the program is. And I think you guys have pretty well established the quality of what you're doing, but I think a lot of people don't understand the specifics of that. Those who haven't gotten to do either have kids in the program, or the porters who've gotten to come and do a look, or educators from other schools who you guys have trained. Tell us a little bit about High Scope and the program and all of that.
Yeah, and that's common. And I will tell you my own experience when I drove up to a Pre-K for SA center for the first time, and I saw it was just in a strip mall, and I was like, this is like a high quality, seriously? And then I walked in the building, was like just blown away by what I saw. And so that's part of the beauty of Pre-K for SA, is that the centers were designed for 4-year-olds, but they're also designed to show that it's not just about the building, and you can take a pretty ordinary building and turn it into a fabulous, high quality early learning center by having highly skilled people inside, and by having the right tools and materials in there. And so our pre-K first aid centers, we have 4 of them around town, and that's probably the most high profile piece of our program everybody knows about our centers. And they're designed to be demonstration sites to show what's possible when children have access to a highly skilled teacher and an evidence-based curriculum, which we use HighScope. HighScope has been around for more than 50 years and is one of 3 really well-researched approaches to early learning. And the research on HighScope has shown that when children are engaged in learning through play, they actually develop the executive function and the self-regulation and those kind of brain functions that help to guide their learning all throughout life. And that's really, a lot of people think that early learning is about learning, you know, your numbers and your letters. And while that does happen, early learning is actually about building a strong brain architecture and making sure that you have the mathematical thinking and the scientific thinking and the literacy development that get built on later. And so that's what our education centers do, is they show teachers and families what's possible and what it looks like. But then we also have professional learning. So we provide free professional learning for any early learning educator throughout the city. So we work with teachers who teach the little bitty babies all the way up to teachers who are working in 3rd grade to help them deliver high quality as well. And then our grants program. So we are supporting other programs and improving their quality, particularly around some of the innovations we've come up with. I mentioned the outdoor learning. That's one of our first curricular innovations, which shows how you can take what's happening inside and you take that kind of learning outside, which is critical because children in this generation spend about half as much time outdoors as their parents' generation did, which is contributing to high rates of diabetes and obesity and other health issues in children, as well as issues around attention and social development. So our children spend, even in normal times, a lot of time outside, not just, I mean, they're running around, but they're engaged in purposeful play, literacy development, mathematics development, but through the things like mud kitchens and climbing and having boxes which they can create into, you know, play areas and making up performances and all those pieces that are so critical to child development. And so we support other programs in implementing that. We want San Antonio to change some of our poor health indicators for children by increasing outdoor learning and play. We have gardens, so we're doing a health initiative with CHEF, which is culinary health education for families, which teaches families to make small changes to their diets to have big impact on health outcomes. So our children grow their own food. You know, children will eat what they grow. So our kids eat healthy vegetables and they put herbs. They know all about Swiss chard and, you know, different thyme. How do you add thyme and basil to a recipe? So those are the kinds of things that they get to learn and that we get to share with other programs so we can incorporate those across San Antonio.
One of the things that stuck out to me when I did a tour for one of the stories that I've done about you guys was I was walking through and you guys explained that these outdoor spaces, which are extensive, start out almost empty and then slowly the children fill them up and like decide what they want to build and work with their teachers to create these special reading nooks and art pieces and stuff. And I thought that was so fascinating because they're really invested in it. Like they kind of occupied the space like they owned it. Very much do. And then the other outdoor thing was that outdoor classroom that you guys have. I think it's at the North Side campus. That's a classroom outside.
Yes.
In a covered patio. And that I've been thinking a lot about COVID learning and I have thought very much about how you guys have probably some of the better space to accommodate it. And then how, as you guys go in, because now y'all are are you guys partnering with Edgewood?
We are.
As you're advising, I mean, obviously a lot of these programs are operating on space restraints. And how have you been able to help them go in and think about what's at their disposal to create that more imaginative, less, it's not prepackaged, it's very like open space. Bill, how do you guys help them do that when they might have not the facilities that you do?
Yeah, so in the school district, so we're working in Gardendale elementary school, and we're also partnering with another school, Paralis Elementary School in Edgewood, and in school districts, the space issue is almost the opposite. So the classroom spaces are a lot smaller oftentimes. They're not designed for the larger space that you need for an indoor classroom. Outside, a lot of campuses have plenty of space, in Texas anyway. I mean, that's not true, obviously in New York or someplace else, but in Texas, many of our campuses have a lot of space, whereas the pre-K for SA centers, as I said, were built in strip malls. Nobody was really thinking about outdoor learning when they were built. And so at the North Center, it's this very narrow little space that they've had to create into beautiful outdoor spaces. Whereas Gardendale, we walked over and they're like, oh my gosh, you have so much outdoor space. Where do we even begin? So it's how do you imagine that space and put in the pieces that help turn it into a space where children can learn and create and design. And so we've started to do that, and also do that with the community, because the outdoor space isn't just for the children, it's actually for the community as well. So what are the kinds of things that the families would like to see in the land surrounding their school that they might be able to bring their children to at other times, or that they might enjoy themselves sitting out there and being there. So Edgewood's been a great partner in helping us think through how do we take what we've learned at Pre-K for SA and translate that and replicate that in a traditional public school system. And I say traditional only to say that it's the structure, because Edgewood is not traditional. Edgewood is doing amazing things, and I cannot say enough about their superintendent and their board and how much they are really reimagining what an urban school district can be, because they're landlocked. They don't have a lot of space to expand and do, so they're taking what they have in terms of their buildings and their spaces and really rethinking those. And we're delighted to partner with them, and they've been very open. We put all of our centers have observation windows in every classroom, because that's part of our job, is to help aspiring teachers and other folks understand what high quality looks like. And so we talk about our teachers. We say, you're essentially teaching in a fishbowl. I mean, people are looking in at you all the time. Well, the same thing has happened at Gardendale. So we've put in observation windows so that Gardendale can become a demonstration site for pre-K through second grade. So people can see that you can take what was typically an ordinary classroom in school and turn it into an exceptionally high quality early learning experience that is, to your point, guided by children's learning. One of our key foundations of Pre-K for SA is the behavior of children is not controlled by the adults. Behavior of children is controlled by the children. And people are always amazed that our children do problem solving. So we teach the children from the very beginning that they can solve their own problems, and they can negotiate with their peers about how do you address any tensions or concerns. And people are always amazed to see our classrooms. The kids are just doing their thing, and the teachers are engaged with a group over here, and the other ones might be having an argument, but they figure out how to solve that problem really quickly. And so we're doing that at Gardendale too, all the way up, to show children that you don't need an adult controlling you. What you need to do is think through, and you need adult guidance and facilitation, but you are capable of controlling your own behavior and doing your own thinking. And that's why all the materials get introduced purposely. Both our indoor and our outdoor classrooms at the very beginning of the year actually have very few materials in them, because we want that's part of teaching children routines and procedures. And so all the materials, they understand why they're in the classroom. And then if there are new materials that are going to be added, those are based on what the children are interested in and what they would like to do, and they get added in a purposeful way. So so by the end, the classrooms look really complex. In the beginning, it looks like there's not that much here, but then the children are the ones that bring in and add things to the room.
And I think that as you're describing this, a lot of us are thinking, yes, this sounds exactly like what I would want for my kid. And as I have described in print, not just like blowing smoke or anything, as I've described in print, this is the Cadillac of pre-K. And it was just, and I remember talking to Kathy Brooks in the beginning about, and Elaine Mendoza, about like wanting to set standards and wanting to give that highest quality. Now, with that has come the critique from on the other side of that, which is, well, you could bring more kids into those centers if you would not maybe do some of the extras or the stuff that you're doing. And so I want to transition a little bit into this coming election, because that question is probably on a lot of folks' minds. I was looking at your polling numbers from the from San Antonio Fairfax thing, and it looked good. It looks like
Yeah.
48% are a definite yes, another 18% are probably yes. But if you are addressing that percentage of folks who would vote no, first of all, what kind of critique? I mean, you have stood before city council and heard a lot of that. You have answered those questions. Um, hopefully you treated yourself to a glass of wine after some of those. Because there were some wild ones. And but then also, what are you hearing from people who are just not convinced and think that it's a lot of money spent on just a few kids and that it could be better spent? What's your response?
Well, yeah, and all of those, I actually appreciate good conversation and questions and really welcome that, because I think anytime you're spending taxpayer dollars, you have an obligation to explain what you're doing with those and make good use of those, because they're precious. We only have so many of them, and they need to be spent in the best way, most effective way possible. So I actually love those conversations, because I feel like we can explain very clearly why investing in early learning, and particularly pre-K for SA, is worth it. I mean, the research is clear. I mean, I'm an education researcher, spent 15 years doing that. And I can tell you the only education intervention that has just uniform agreement that it actually works is early learning. Everybody knows that that's the piece that works, as long as it's high quality. And I say this, mediocre pre-K doesn't change anything. It's not bad, it just doesn't change anything. It's the high quality pieces that matter. And that's what really differentiates San Antonio from some of the other programs. There are other cities that are implementing pre-K programs, but most of those started with access. They said, we just want to get more kids into pre-K. And what San Antonio did that was so different was to say, no, we're going to start with quality. We're going to show what does the highest quality look like, and then we're going to roll quality out. And that actually has made all the difference, because building the pre-K for SA centers to be the highest quality said, okay, here's what it looks like, and here's what it costs. And we know it costs a little bit more than it does in the public pre-K on average. But we also know what to spend the money on, because it's not just having the money, it's what you spend the money on. And I will tell you that the big difference between, so for pre-K for SA, the average cost of a student is $11,500 per year. Now that's for a day that goes from, the full school day plus extended hours for families who are working full time or going to school. The average school district in San Antonio spends about $9,000. Now, I will tell you, there are some school districts that actually spend more than we do, but it's the difference in when you look at pre-K for SA's budget and school district budget is in what we pay our people. We are committed to paying a living wage to all of our folks, including our assistant teachers. And that's not true in most early learning settings. Early learning teachers are notoriously underpaid, and they tend to be primarily single females, moms. And so there's this constant churn in early learning, because you're training people, they can't live on what you're paying them. So as soon as they get more education, they move on to a job where they can make a little bit more money. And so we're part of a group movement across the nation to say, let's pay a living wage to the teachers of our very youngest children, because what an important job that is. So really at pre-K for SA, the majority of difference in cost is around what we pay our employees, and we pay them so that they can live and they can support their families, because we think that's an important thing. And then a lot of people don't understand that we do more than run the 4 centers. We give away $4.2 million in grants. We have professional learning that's free and open to any early learning teacher in San Antonio, whether they're teaching in a public school, a private school, a charter school, an early childhood center, as well as have a huge family engagement program that is centered on families being the first and most important teachers of their children, so that they help their children do well, not just in pre-K, but all the way up the pipeline, and so that the families can enter the workforce and provide for their families. That's really critical. So our family cafes are a place where families can come, they can do job searches, they can learn about doing resumes, they can get connected to college, they can get connected to other programs that will help them to provide a really stable, a sustainable situation for their families, which is really helpful and critical to lifting families out of poverty. So, the critics typically say, well, your budget is, $46 million and you only serve 2,000 children. The truth is that even if you just count the children we serve in the centers plus the children we serve through grants, that's 5,000 children. But then when you talk about all the families that we serve plus all the children that are served by the teachers we train, we, by the end of our first 8 years, will have benefited almost 500,000 children in San Antonio. That's huge. That's a big scale endeavor. Most of the pre-K programs across the country are small. San Antonio, because we're in Texas after all, and we're in San Antonio, has shown you can do public pre-K that's high quality on a large scale and do it effectively. And that's really why San Antonio is kind of the envy, like, and why we get so many calls, not just from educators, but from policymakers, from business leaders who are like, how do we do in our community what you're doing in San Antonio? So I know there are some people that don't necessarily believe in early education, and I think that's in part because they don't understand the critical role of it, and they think that what happens in an early learning center is we're making children sit in their desks and write their names a million times. They don't know that we're teaching children through play, which is what children do naturally, and that really Harvard Center for the Developing Child will tell you that builds a strong brain. And it's that same brain architecture that we develop by the age of 5 that carries us all through life. And so if we do it right on the front end, it's a lot less expensive to educate and to take care of folks in the long run. But not everybody is aware of that research.
And I want to, on kind of that note, building on that, I think that a lot of the framing of the pre-K and the public discussion has either pitted you guys, and I have done this for sure, pitted you against public schools and said, okay, who's getting the best results, as a way of showing that, as a way of answering the question of should you be spending that much money. But then you, I think at some point kind of said to me, well, but if we just have the highest reading scores in 3rd grade or whatever, then that's not what we're here to do, to produce 2,000 kids a year who will have slightly higher reading scores by 3rd grade. We're here to lift the whole system. And if we don't see those gains across San Antonio, then that's really where the question is answered. And so have we seen those gains across San Antonio? When the first, it was 2018, I guess, when the first group of pre-K kids took their first STAR reading tests.
Yes.
And the results were showing there was obviously a lot happens in kinder through 3rd grade, but the results were showing this incremental further growth for the pre-K for SA kids. But then on your larger goal, what have we seen across the city since pre-K for SA came to town?
Yeah. So what we've seen is, one, there's a lot of awareness. There's been a surge of awareness among families about the importance of starting early, which is huge. There are many communities that are spending lots of money trying to convince families to send their children to pre-K 4. And San Antonio, that's changed. People understand now that pre-K 4, that 4-year-olds do belong in school and that it's an important year. Whereas when we started out, and even as recently as 2016, there were a lot of people in the community who were saying, no, 4 is too early. That's a very small group of people who say that now. People understand the value of pre-K 4, so that's huge. It's also that our school districts have invested in early learning. So in the last legislative session, the policymakers agreed to put more money into early learning and help Texas public schools go from half day to full day pre-K. Well, in San Antonio, our districts were already moving in that direction because they understood the importance of it and they had the support of pre-K for SA. So we were able, through our grants, to help school districts go from half day to full day and demonstrate that children who had full day pre-K had much better outcomes, so that school boards could understand this was a big investment and it was worth it. And so even before HB3 passed, all of our school districts were committed to going to full day. The school boards have said we need to do this even if the money doesn't come from the state. So those are big gains. And we're starting to see better performance in terms of the quality of instruction that's happening in pre-K and K, and it's moving on up. We've been able to train early learning leaders, so principals. Most principals don't actually have a background in early learning, and some of them mistakenly think, oh, early learning is about pushing, if we do in this is what it looks like in 3rd grade. If we just push that down earlier, that'll be better. That's actually detrimental to children's learning and development. So we've been able to say, no, don't do that. Do the high quality learning through play. That's going to set up the children's brains for that kind of learning that comes later. And then this year, one of the things that HB3 did was require that teachers in pre-K or in kindergarten through third grade and leaders go through the science of reading training, so reading academies. And that's going to be a cost to the school district. So at Pre-K for SA, we said we want to support the school districts in doing that. So we're going to become a provider. We applied to be a provider of those reading academies, and we're providing that free to all of our partner districts, which is saving them tens of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars, so that they can have better trained teachers. So I won't say right now there's a direct, like we can't say, oh, Pre-K for SA opened in 2012 and now we have everybody is passing reading in third grade, but we're moving in that direction, and it's bigger than that. And you're right. I do say, like, our centers are impressive, but if that's all we did was serve 2,000 kids a year in these amazing centers, well, that would be good. It really wouldn't change very much. So it's really transforming the landscape and that's the brilliance of the design of Pre-K for SA. Again, I had nothing to do with it. I showed up and was wowed by it and wanted to be part of it. But the actual design is so comprehensive. And I will tell you that if it was set up to compete with public schools, I wouldn't have joined in. I'm a public educator. I've spent my whole life in public schools and training public educators. So the part of what I loved so much about it was a way to partner with public schools and bring additional funding that can support public schools in investing in early learning, which often gets overlooked because there's just not enough funding in our public education system for everything.
And two things off of that. One, out of HB3, several things happened that affected you guys. HB3
Yep.
Funding bill that passed in 2019, and we were all excited about it. And it had allocated one of the biggest increases in public education funding in forever.
Yep.
And now COVID, and I'm wondering if the statewide pre-K champions are kind of gearing up for a fight in the legislature to try to keep some of that.
Yep. I won't say that we're gearing up for a fight, but I will say that we are gearing up to help folks, a conversation to help folks understand the importance of continuing that investment. And it is going to be tough, though. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The state is facing serious budget shortfalls because of COVID. School districts are facing their own budget issues. So all of that gain from last session is on the table this time, and we are very hopeful that we can help policymakers understand that you need to be investing in early learning, that's where we get a return on investment, and we've got to stay the course in Texas so that we can have a really strong future. And again, the research is clear. We did our own, we had a group out of Teachers College Columbia, the premier educational return on investment center, look at Pre-K for SA and say, what is the community getting for their investment in Pre-K for SA? And what they said was, for every $100 invested in Pre-K for SA, even after the cost of it, the community is getting back $156 in real community benefits, including higher income for families who are able to take advantage of the extended day program. So there are, these are third party folks that have taken a look at the program and said, San Antonio is doing it right. They're getting back far more than they're putting into it, and it should keep going.
Yeah. And the Reading Center is another thing, or the Reading Academy are another thing that I didn't know much about, and I'm just starting to understand. And it centers in, and I'd love for you to touch on this, the just to coax you into another hot agreement. Let's talk about learning to read, which you wouldn't think would be a hotbed of disagreement, but it turns out that it is. And I think that there's suddenly been a kind of an awakening to, whoa, teaching kids to read is something that we need to be putting a lot of emphasis on, and we need to be very deliberate about it, and we need to just put more intentionality and science behind it. And so you guys, SA Reads, y'all are the two in San Antonio, right? And then each of the education service centers are as well. And so
Correct.
tell me a little bit about teaching kids to read and what we have been missing about that and why we need somebody to teach kids to read.
Yeah, I mean, this is the ongoing discussion in education, quite frankly, and we have it about every 10 or 15 years. We've actually known for a really long time how children learn to read and what it takes for children to learn to read, but it's complex. And so what ends up happening is people tend to take one piece of the reading puzzle or the other rather than both. So, you've heard before, they used to talk about phonics versus whole language. You talk about balanced literacy. It's really all about children having experience with books and language and meaning making, in that words matter, words mean something, that the written word means something, and then also the decoding piece of it. And it's that combination together that helps children to learn to read well. And for some reason, we keep trying to separate those pieces out and say, well, it's this or it's that, and you can't do both of them together. And so the science of reading, which is what the reading academies are based on, is bringing that back together to say, no, we do need to understand how phonemes work and what phonemic awareness means, but also that children need the context of reading. Because one of the things that happened in the 2000s decade was we taught a lot of children to word call. They could read the word, but they didn't really have any comprehension of it, and they didn't like to do it. So we developed a generation of people who could read but don't read, because they thought of reading as taking this paragraph that was meaningless to them and just calling out the words. And so I think that the reading academies is a way to help teachers understand really what are all the many components of teaching to read. It's, I started as a special education teacher, so I was immersed in the different ways that children learn to read. And there are some different ways. There are some children that never learn to decode. There are some children that only decode. But we haven't done enough, I think, to allow our teachers to become experts in literacy development in the way that they need to. And so I think that's what the reading academies are trying to address. And also that even when if you go through a teacher preparation program and you learn about literacy development and how to teach children to read, that's not enough. You still got to come back, and once you've started to do that, getting more training to understand more in depth how that happens. So the read academies are, again, another way for teachers who already have some experience with literacy development to get even more in-depth experience, so that they're really experts in it and they can make decisions in the moment about how best to help children to read.
And I think, we're sitting here talking about this, and to people outside of education or parents who don't yet have that age or whose kids are past that age and everything went fine, the huge impact of learning to read and loving to read and all of that. I'm 36, and I was talking to somebody who is within a year or two of, and so we grew up in the night. We learned to read in the late 80s ish, early 90s.
Yeah.
When there was a pretty big, apparently, whole language phonics flare up.
Yep.
And my teacher was firmly on the phonics side. And his teacher was firmly on the whole language side. And we talked about, as adults, what it's like when we read.
Yeah.
Like how that's affected our reading. And obviously, like you were saying, you need both and whatnot. But I will say that, and granted, this isn't a scientific study. This is two, having lunch. But they were talking about how when they run into words that they don't know already, how totally derailing it is. And so it has limited the kind of books that they want to take on. Whereas I had always had this appetite to overachieve in my reading, to the point where I was just reading to win, not really joy. But I will be the fourth grader who reads Moby Dick.
Yes.
I didn't a word of it, but I decoded every single word in there.
Yeah.
And just it's so fascinating, because then you start looking at the economic and social ramifications of being able to communicate in writing and reading. And you really are, when you get down to reading, you really are talking about kind of one of the building blocks of an adult's life. Like that, I use this in school. Like if you cannot answer that any other time, you can totally answer it in reading. And so I think that there's some skepticism now about the like kids who are struggling to read in 3rd grade are more likely to end up in prison and all of that. I mean, there's some kind of doomsday stuff around that predictors. But whether or not, like, I'm not even sure we should need that dramatic of a picture to just say being able to read fluently and well serves you well, and every kid deserves that, right?
Yes.
Like, does the difference have to be prison or 400, 500 for us?
Yeah.
And that's kind of a question I'm starting to ask about a lot of things, pertaining to a lot of what y'all do, like the high quality. I'm starting to ask that about special ed, like the threshold that we require for getting the best, like to be set up well and to be put on a great track and to be given great tools. We're demanding to see a lot. Like, well, how, like, is it making us enough money as a city to justify doing this? And so talk to me. I mean, this is pub theology. I'd love to just hear, and you and I've kind of talked about this before, so I'm kind of cheating because I know some of your
You already know the answer.
you're good for it. But the ethical element of giving this to not only pre-K kids in general, but pre-K kids whose parents aren't sneaking the broccoli in, in their what's her Jessica Seinfeld cookbook, whatever, and who don't have time to go read all the blogs and order all the kits and basically enrich the 4-year-old year at home because they're at home. Giving kids really high quality stuff regardless of their income.
Yeah, it is for me, this is the thread that runs through my whole career, is it's around educational equity, because we know that education matters, and we know that education is the deciding factor in so many aspects of our quality of life, everything from not just career, but to health, and to how your children do and your grandchildren do. And to me, it's the civil right of our time, right? That we need to ensure that every child deserves a high quality education. That should just be granted. That's just what kind of education you get shouldn't depend on what family you happen to be born into. That's just that, especially in the United States, where I think as a country, we understood early on the importance of public education, and what a noble notion. And so I think, but we also know that system hasn't served all children equally well. I mean, we have a long history of some children doing really great in the system, and some children, the same kinds of children, over and over and over again, over years, over generations, not being served well. And so when you have something like a pre-K for SA, or this some other kind of high quality intervention, I think we have an obligation to help to provide that to the children who need it most, who don't have those benefits. And my child had the benefit of being the child of an educator, somebody who had time to figure out all the different camps, who had the means to do that, to supplement her education. And I don't think I loved my child or want any more for her than any of the other families I've ever worked with. I just had those resources to me, and not because I'm special. I mean, I was born into a family that helped me get those resources. And so I think that I'm a believer in the possibility of social mobility and people moving up, and that every child should have the opportunity to become, as I say, I mean, it sounds cliche, but really to live up to their possibilities and their dreams. And I believe wholeheartedly that starts in pre-K, and when we can help children understand their worth, and that they're entitled to this, that this should just be a normal part. that everyone should just being in a great school should be a normal part of every child's experience. And so I think that's really what we're about, and helping that we want that to be true in San Antonio, that for every 4-year-old in San Antonio has a great start to school, and that continues on even up into the upper grades.
And I think that another thing that you guys have shown is that those parents recognize quality and choose that option.
Yep.
I think that's another myth, is that those kind of things are put in to appease middle-class parents who want basket weaving and, French.
Yeah.
And you guys are really showing that, no, given the option, this is what everyone would pick for them.
Yes. Yeah, I've been around education a long time. I have never, and I've worked in all kinds of schools. I have never met a single family that did not love their child and did not want their child to be well educated. Now, not all of them did all the things I wish they would do to support that. Not all of them, but they all wanted that for their children. And when they saw that it was possible, that's what they chose to do. And the question I get asked often from families is, okay, our children have had this great experience in pre-K, whether it's in our program or in one of our partner programs. What's next? Where do we go next? Is there a kindergarten program that's just like this? And that's really how Gardendale started, was because our families were like, where are we going next to continue to have these great experiences? Because really it should continue on all through our children's education. And that's what we want to help make possible. I always say, we'll take care of the pre-K through second grade part. Let's work with our partners to take care of the upper grade part so that all of our children have that opportunity.
Absolutely. Because that foundation is so important, but also no reason to see how much stress it can take for the next few years.
Yeah.
No need for that. We have a question from Megan Legacy. She says, when education specialists claim that pre-K education is not critical for preschool age children, how do we educate people on how effective this is for the future generations? So she's kind of asking, how do we carry this message forward? What are the effective ways for us to help the doubters who are left see?
Yeah. So I think, well, one, we say we're a seeing is believing program. So in normal times, when we're able to invite people into the center, we do, because when people see what the 4-year-olds are capable of doing, it helps them to really understand the power of it. And we've had many people who walked in the door saying, I don't believe taxpayers should be paying for this, and this is all a bunch of nonsense, who leave actually volunteering in the centers. That happens actually on a regular basis. But it's also about helping people to access the research that is very clear. So you can get James Heckman's research out of who's an economist that makes the financial case, but also the Center for the Developing Child out of Harvard. We have learned a ton about brain development in the last decade, and we learn more every year. And the latest research out of Harvard says that a young child's brain is developing 1 million synapses a second. It is developing so rapidly that it's not just every day counts, every minute counts. And so that's why it's important for children to have these experiences early on, because by the time they're 5, their brain is largely developed, and that brain architecture will be the same brain architecture they have when they're 50. And it doesn't mean that you can't keep learning and growing, but the prime time to do that is in these very early years. It's when the most rapid brain development happens. It's when there's a very strong tie between executive function, which develops between the ages of 4 and 5, and outcomes, not just in school, but in life, in career. It's that executive function that allows us to negotiate life's uncertainties. So children that have strong executive function are able to problem solve and figure out, what do I do if I don't get the class I want? What do I do if my financial aid runs out? A lot of people think that youth drop out of college because they don't get the grades. The reason that most youth drop out of college is because they run up against a problem they don't know how to negotiate. Somebody back home is sick and they don't know how to take care of that. Their roommate drives them nuts. Their financial aid runs out. They didn't get the class, and they don't have the executive function to know, oh, I can problem solve through this. I can go get help. I can do these things. So they leave. Whereas children that have strong executive function learn that I can maneuver through this, whether it's at college or career or even in life. And so that's really what early learning is about. And that's it's that brain architecture that we have to help people understand. And so I recommend the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard. They have all kinds of things on their website that will just blow your mind. So.
And I always found it fun to read, like especially when I had young children, as though I don't anymore, still do.
Yeah.
I think it's fun as a parent of young children to read that stuff, and then you're like, whoa, suddenly it becomes much more interesting.
Yes, absolutely.
All the nonsense suddenly makes sense. And when you are exposed to great educators, suddenly their work becomes so much more intriguing. When you see how much it is connected to brain formation. One other thing, and we've talked a little bit about this, there's a Facebook post that's running around with tons, just from my very quick reading of it, had quite a few pieces of misinformation about how much the program costs, and that I'm sure you've seen it. I'm someone here just asking if that had come up. You just for the sake of clarity, Pre-K for SA is not a Head Start program.
Yep. We are not a Head Start program. We are a complementary program. So Head Start is a great program. It's a program that was designed to lift families out of poverty by focusing on education, but also family, helping the families with services. And so Head Start serves a very narrow segment of the population, and only certain children are eligible for that. And again, we partner with Head Start, we support Head Start, but Head Start, even if you gave them, all more money, they wouldn't be able to serve more children because they're designed to serve a specific population of children and families. And they do that through high quality education. So we're a distinct but complementary program to Head Start, but people do get confused by that, and that was a deliberate decision when the Brainpower Task Force was looking at how to design Pre-K for SA. They said Head Start is one thing, and it's a good program. We want to design something that can serve more children and that can eventually expand to serve. If we're able to get Pre-K funded through the state, that we can expand to serve even more of the children who are not eligible for state Pre-K. Because that's the other thing too. People are like, well, everybody can go to Pre-K because the state funds it. Well, first of all, the state doesn't fully fund full day Pre-K, but even if they did, they are only funding it for, again, a particular segment of the population. And 60% of San Antonio's 4-year-olds qualify for state funded Pre-K, but that means that 40% don't. And so, and the children that are in the Head Start program also qualify for the state Pre-K program. So actually, a lot of the ways that districts are putting together a full day program is by combining Head Start dollars and their state dollars to create a full day program for certain kids. But there's a lot of children out there, particularly those who are in families that make just a little bit too much money to qualify for state public Pre-K free, but can't afford it in the private sector. And Pre-K for SA, we're one of the only programs that can serve those children. And so we've always reserved some of our seats for families that didn't qualify, but couldn't afford it in the private sector through our sliding scale tuition. And that's what, in reauthorization, we're hoping that as the districts take on serving more of the eligible children in full day programs, we can serve those kids that fall in the gap between being eligible and being able to afford it.
I was going to ask you where you wanted to go after reauthorization, and that's a great answer to that question.
That is, yep, that's where we're headed.
We have another question from Mandy Batchy. What's been the most surprising data that has come out since the start of Pre-K for SA?
So there's two pieces that came out of, well, I'm going to say three. So the one, our return on investment study, I was pleasantly surprised. I was surprised at how high the return on investment was, because we asked them to take a very conservative approach. And we said, only consider it a return if you can actually, monetize it, and you're not estimating. It really is something that you can put your hands on and define. And so to come up with that kind of return, $156 for every $100 invested, was a pleasant surprise. The two things out of the long-term impact study out of UTSA, one was around attendance. So children who attended Pre-K for SA tended to have, by the time they got to third grade, been in school 8 more weeks than their peers who did not attend. So every year they tended to go to school 10 more days than their non-pre-K for SA peers, which is huge. I mean, that's like, that 2 weeks in a school year is a lot of extra learning, and it's a lot of extra dollars for the schools. The other one that came out of that study that I was surprised about was the math scores were so high. They were even higher than the reading scores. And that surprised me just because we focus a lot, particularly in our first years, on early literacy development. So I wasn't surprised that our kids were better readers, but the fact that they were also better at math, I think was very reassuring that all of the work that we're doing around developing scientific thinking and mathematical thinking is working. But I wasn't sure that that was going to come out that way. So.
And the attendance thing is kind of mind-boggling to me, because it's not like they're driving themselves to school.
Right. Well, but it shows that our messages to families matter, right? And helping families to understand that, I think sometimes, and this is true a lot of families, though, and I've talked with my own siblings about this. Oh, it doesn't matter if you miss a day here or you miss a day there. We go out for a week to go on vacation or what have you. But when we help them understand, no, children's brains are so developing so rapidly that it is a huge deal to miss a single day of instruction when you're under the age of 8. That adds up to that adds up to instructional time that matters. And so I think when families understand, and when they feel like their children are getting a value and getting a great experience, plus the kids themselves will drag their parents to school. They'll say, no, I want to go to school. Like, they love going to school. And so they've learned that school is a joyful place for them, and a place for them where they get to, be engaged in really interesting things. And so the children, I think, are as much responsible for kind of prodding, yeah, let's get up and go. And I don't think we see quite as much of the children who are saying, no, I don't want to go to school today. So that helps.
We wonder, like, how much of attendance, like missed days of schools, is just like parents who are like, I just cannot fight this.
And that happens. I can totally relate to that, right? And so we get it, and we say, you know what, there are some days that's going to happen, but let us help. Let's figure out if you're having trouble with transportation or if something's going on. Let's sit down and think about those things together, because that's real. And helping develop networks among families that are like, if my car breaks down, can you help? Or is there somebody that can, if something goes wrong at work and I can't pick up, that's really important too, because a lot of times parents feel isolated. And I know I wouldn't have survived with my daughter if I hadn't had the group of moms that I could call and say, oh my gosh, can you pick up Claire today? Or, help me with this because, she's sick and I can't get away from work, and those kinds of things. So I think that's important too, is developing that community among families.
Well, on that note, how can volunteers, this is from Gavin in the other room, how can volunteers or faith-based groups get involved to help students and teachers? Do you have tutoring programs or ways to volunteer?
We do. So our, faith-based groups are a really critical part of the early learning system in San Antonio in general, because the faith-based communities have always provided early learning and care. That's just their part of what we call a mixed delivery system. And so we consider them critical partners. So on one hand, we're partnering with faith-based groups who are providing early learning and care, but we also have groups of volunteers that come in and read with the children, or they're part of the outdoor learning group where they help with the gardening. That's all in normal times. Right now, sadly, we can't have other people in the building because of COVID. So not even our families get to come in and volunteer at this time, because we're really, one, licensing says they can't, but that's for good reason. It's because we're trying to control and make sure that we don't bring COVID in. But yes, absolutely, once we kind of get back to normal where we are able to bring folks into our building, we love to have groups that come in, and it can be a one-time thing. It can be we have some groups. We have a group of women from a Jewish center that come into our North Center every week, and they read with the children, and love doing that. We have a good relationship with the St. PJ's Catholic Center with our South Center, so our kids and their kids do some things together. So yes, we'd love to have community folks come in, and so all you have to do is contact us, and we'll figure out what you like to do and how we might be able to work together. And we find that it's as beneficial for the volunteers as it is for our children, because, there's something about being around joyful 4-year-olds that really lifts people's spirits. And for me, I know it's a thing that when I feel, concerned about things, or particularly concerned about the world, I just go to a classroom like, okay, it's all going to be okay. You can see the 4-year-olds, they've got this, we're in good hands. So yeah.
I make my own 4-year-old hug me.
Yes.
Like,
Makes the world so much better.
your purpose on earth is not necessarily to like minister to my emotional needs, but
Yeah.
I am, so, and you're here, so come here. That I lost what I was going to say. That's funny. Oh, the mixed mode development. Are you guys keeping track on what's being hit hardest by COVID? Because we talked about pre-K being down, and I know that for some of those centers, I mean, public school is funded on attendance.
Yep.
You guys have a little bit of a cushion because you have, y'all are able to hold funding steady.
Right.
The folks who are living off of tuition, are y'all seeing like some of, because part of the plan for expanding pre-K is across the city increasing quality seats,
Yep.
correct? And
Yep.
that includes
Correct.
centers. Are we losing them? Are they just folding up? What's the stat?
Sadly, a little bit of that. So we work with child development centers right now. We have an alliance of 17 centers that we're helping. This was even pre-COVID, to think about being because child development centers are small businesses. And so and they operate on razor thin margins. And so how do you use economies of scale and automation and other efficiencies to create a more sustainable business model that will hopefully allow you to invest in the quality indicators, and in particular invest in your people and raise some of those salaries. But in San Antonio, we have seen 28 licensed childcare facilities close since the spring and COVID, which is tragic. I mean, they just couldn't make it work, even though the state has increased subsidy rates for providers because of the lower numbers. It's not enough to keep people afloat. And so we are working very hard with Workforce Alamo, with United Way, with some of the other folks, the Early Matters team. We're really trying to help figure out how do we sustain the childcare system during this time when it just everything is so uncertain, because their enrollment is down. It's uneven. Their staffing is a problem. So our childcare centers are in crisis. It's tough, and we're doing what we can. We've been providing supplies to them, helping to help them get through this. But it's critical that we figure this out so that as a system we still have childcare, because people can't go back to work if they don't have a place for their children, right? And so it's really a business issue as much as it is an education issue.
Yeah, because the schools are going to hurt, but they're still going to be there.
Yep.
You guys, pending the vote, will still be there. Those private guys can't just like go, okay, y'all are ready to come back. We will completely.
Right.
So we are, and you said how many have closed?
28 so far.
What is that percentage wise?
I don't know. There's about 400 licensed centers in San Antonio, Bexar County, but that's so it doesn't sound like a huge number, but it's big in just that short amount of time. And some of those centers were only 11% of our childcare centers in licensed facilities in San Antonio are rated as quality in the quality rating system. And some of those centers that have closed were 4-star centers. So it's not just that they're any old centers. Some of our best centers are finding that they just can't make it work.
Oh gosh. So on that note, I guess, if pre-K for SA does not pass, what would be the most damaging result for students in our community?
Well, for sure, I think that we would see a huge decline in access for 4-year-olds, and there's lots of families that would have no place to go. But also, with the grants that our school districts and our parochial schools and our child development centers have come to count on, as well as the professional learning, you're going to see a tremendous decline in the quality of instruction for children over the next, several years, for sure, because Pre-K for SA is really the only organization that is completely focused on improving instructional quality across the board. It's not set up to do that, and most school districts don't have the funds to put into it. And so we would see right away, you would see a loss of seats, but even across time, you would see a loss of quality and support for early learning.
Well, thank you so much. I think that, I mean, I have asked my whole list, and I feel like you've got your answers down to like you
That's,
are, well, I think that speaks to the fact that like this is a clear issue, and this is
yeah,
something where the benefits are clear, how to do it best is clear. And so thank you for sharing that with us and for raising hopefully in our minds some of the community concerns that we need to be
yeah,
considering as we head into supporting our youngest learners, supporting small businesses, supporting public programs, because we're depending on them now more than ever. You mentioned that group of people who don't quite qualify for public for the state programs. That group is going to grow
yes,
because people are losing income, and people who had pretty stable situations are losing pieces and parts of what kept them stable. So that's something I've heard a lot, is that the percentages on these things are all about to change. We're going to have more
yep,
people qualify, and we're going to need seats for them. And then we're also going to have more people who are struggling right there on the edge. And even people who, if they're not on the edge, took a hit. And
yep,
so we're going
yep.
to be looking for help. So thank you for that. Oh, we actually do have one more question, and we have a little more time.
Okay,
So go ahead.
great.
There are some studies and data that suggest that the biggest gap in learning for underserved populations happens over the summer months. Does pre-K for SA consider this, and what are they doing about it? If not, are there any plans for the future in that regard? Glad he asked.
Great question. Yeah. So Richard Rothstein's research would say that that's where the academic gaps really come before kindergarten and in summers and after school. So pre-K for SA is designed to operate around the school year calendar, and we've talked about opening up summer programs. And in talking with our families, one of the pieces of discussion that we've had is what they really like is that we have summer programming that's more based on families and engaging families in that time and connecting children to existing summer programs with their public schools. Our public schools offer a transition program, many of them for children going from pre-K to K. And so we're trying to get children connected to those programs and get ready to go have a smooth transition into their kindergarten year, and then have families over the summer. We have all kinds of events where we come together in parks and have special get-togethers so that we can support families as the first and most important teachers of their children. But to answer your question, yes, we have thought about summer program, and that may come. It's one of, we really listen to our families and what their needs are, and so I think that in future years, should we be reauthorized, that may be something that we would explore, at least having a smaller program available for those families that need that. Because we do know that many of our families, while many of our families enjoy having those summer months to be with their children unscheduled and doing those things, that's not a reality for families who are working. And so I think that that's something we certainly would look at in the future.
Thank you. So I'm gonna put that down, and then yeah, if you have any parting message for us as we go forward. I mean, early voting starts in 2 weeks.
Yep.
And so if you wanted people to have one thing in their minds as they're thinking about, as they're going to the polls, what's the picture you want in their minds that you could telegraph in there?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think if you see, you know, I wish that everybody could visit one of our centers and see our children and how bright and beautiful, and come at the beginning of the year and then at the end of the year, how much they learn and grow. And I invite people to go to our website and read some of the stories of our families. They're really powerful about, it's not just for the children, it's for the families, and how much this has meant to them, particularly for families. We often hear from families who felt like maybe their child wasn't ready for school, or maybe their special needs were too much and they wouldn't be accepted. And for the families and the children to feel like they found confidence in themselves and that their children were able to blossom and grow, and that they understand that their community is investing in them. You talked about the election. We this week, our children are registering to vote, because part of our work is our civic engagement initiative, where the children vote every year, every November on election day, or actually the day before election day, they will vote for a nonprofit that they're going to support. And I will tell you that nonprofits that support animals usually are the winner, because 4-year-olds love animals. So, and then the children learn about that nonprofit throughout the year, and we volunteer or might do food drives or other things. And then in the spring, they work with artists who come in, local artists come into the classrooms and help the children create an art piece, which then gets put into our Gracias art auction. And we have a big, and usually it's at the public library and it's curated. We invite all the folks to come. This year we had to do it online, but and then those pieces are auctioned off, and the money that's raised then gets donated back to the nonprofit, the charity that the children selected. And so the children understand that they are part of the community now, and they can contribute to the community in the here and now. They don't have to grow up to do that. They can do that even as 4-year-olds, and that we want them to know. And it's called Gracias San Antonio because it's the children's way of saying thank you to San Antonio for investing in us, and we're investing in you. And so I really think it's a beautiful, so thinking about the Gracias and the children, the joy that they get from being able to contribute to the community, I think is something I'd want folks to keep in mind. And again, when we get back to normal and we can have visitors, please do come out to one of our centers. I think it will transform your way of thinking about lots of things in the world, but particularly the bright future that we have ahead.
I'm going to go so that
okay.
Get back in here. Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome. Always a pleasure, Bekah.
Well, Dr. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on Pub Theology. You know, people always ask us about Pub Theology. We talk about everything at Pub Theology. Every week's different. Next week, it's about birth or justice, right? And lives and things. I mean, we have a whole community of women who are going to go share about that. Last week, we had Pastor Eric from Travis Park Church. We've had Sikh theologians. Every week's different. And people always ask us when we bring in educators or politicians or talk about sometimes about politics, why Pub Theology? But we really believe that all these things in our community really matter, right? And it doesn't have to be about the basics of theology. And I remind people things like it says in Proverbs 22:6, start children off the way they should go. And even when they are old, they will not turn from it. So what y'all are doing is teaching children at a really early age which way they should go, right? That is very important. That is something I think all people of faith or all people of strong beliefs, whether that belief might be, it's a very important thing to consider. And education is strongly tied to so many faith-based organizations that this is something I don't think many people can ignore, or at least they need to really consider. And they're going to consider that obviously at the election, but I think that's something to keep in mind, especially when we think about students that in this age bracket that really need to be directed and to encourage and to really show great care and support through our educational system. I believe you're doing that. So thank you for the hard work that you're doing, especially when you tie it to politics and it can get really messy. Because what you're doing is very pure and very good. And we really are just grateful that you can come on and share this. Henry, I think, just said, thanks for essay. So there you go. That's awesome. We are always on most every week. And so check us out. You can watch any of our videos, share this video, and keep the conversation going, right? We want things like this to always be talked about. Really, we're the theology of a pub. We talk about things people talk about at a bar. So people talk about religion, they talk about politics, they talk about their kids, they talk about education, they talk about their teachers, they talk about all this stuff when they're drinking a beer, usually at the Friendly Spot or someplace like that. And so we really want to keep this conversation going. So share this video. I thank you for my co-host, Bekah, who's one of the best education reporters in the nation. And she keeps us honest and real, even when we don't want to be. And so thank you, Dr. Sarah, for really taking some really good time to discuss this with us. And we will hope for the best. And thank you for all you do. So
thanks. My pleasure.
Coming with us. And we will see you next week and talking about birth or justice. That's pretty cool. So
awesome.
All right.
Bye, guys.
You stay on with us real fast.
All right.